Beginning in 512 BC, the Duke of Wu would begin employing Sun Tzu as his military strategist in an effort to establish a dominant fighting force that the Wu had been so close to achieving in the past. As his interview for the position, Sun Tzu was given the ridiculous task of organizing a force of 180 prostitutes into effective soldiers as an elaborate way of proving his worth. The Duke of Wu frequented the brothel that the prostitutes came from, and Sun Tzu had the Duke's two favorite prostitutes appointed as generals of the new squadron. On training day, when Sun Tzu ordered his concubine soldiers to fall into a line and salute, they began to giggle. He then addressed the Duke's two chosen commanders to establish order with their troops, to which they replied by giggling more. Sun Tzu demanded the commanders come to him that instant and get on their knees. He pulled out a sword and quickly cut both their heads off before they could protest. The Duke, seeing his two favorite prostitutes being beheaded, began to cry and ask why Sun Tzu would do such a horrible thing. His reply was that a general demands absolute obedience from his commanders, who must in turn demand absolute obedience from their soldiers. He then asked the Duke to pick his next two favorite prostitutes as the new commanders, and they reran the drill. This time, the squad of prostitute soldiers did not make a sound and executed their training flawlessly. The Duke understood the message, and Sun Tzu was hired and would serve as head general during the Wu's fights with the Chu, with the brief Wu hegemony being attributed to his military prowess. After the war, Sun Tzu would write his masterpiece, The Art of War, which described the ways of leading an effective army and which would eventually be translated into almost every language and studied by every military leader around the globe, trying to understand the book's hidden meaning. The art of war was based in Taoist teachings, so without this prior knowledge, several whole sections of the book make no sense, and it confused many generals in the West. These meanings were not lost on the generals of ancient China, however, and the various generals of the vassal states began reading Sun Tzu's work as it disseminated, beginning what is known as the Warring States period. The partitioning of the state of Jin ended up being a smashing success. However, it was quite an easy endeavor as the central powers of the Jin state and its ruling family had been waning in the previous decades and thus didn't have a strong army. In a sort of ancient progressivism, the Jin family decided to cease the feudal practice of fiefment, where landowners had to pay a tax to the king of Jin, which also consequently shrunk the size of the Jin administration. In its place, the major families of Han, Zhao, and Wei and Zi, who were one level below the Jins, began charging fees to landowners within their domains, increasing their power and allowing them to form their own armies. When the Chu army arrived at their borders, these armies did nothing and did not join the fight with the Jin army, instead choosing to watch them get defeated and then share in the benefits of being the recipients of the partitioned state. Immediately after the fall of the Jins, the Han, Zhao, and Wei families conspired together and amassed a large army to attack and destroy the House of Zi, annihilating them in 453 BC. The three families split up their former comrades' homeland, effectively creating three powerful post-Jin states that could compete with the other vassals, although they would not be recognized for another 50 years, since King Yuan did not approve of the overthrow of the Jin and the ascension of three new states. The Chu would increase their alliance with the Yu people, gaining them access to the coast. The northward expansion of the Chu would butt up against the southward expansionary goals of the Qi, leading to ever-increasing skirmishes and the construction of a fortified wall between their territories, the first interkingdom border wall. Meanwhile, the Qin would cross the Daba Mountains in the west and begin their conquest of the Sichuan Basin and its indigenous people. Amongst all of this geopolitical jockeying, the Zhou dynasty still maintained official rule of China by ruling from a neutral zone, which included the capital of Luoyang and the immediate surrounding areas. When King Yuan died in 469 BC, he was followed by his son Zhending, who had three sons. When Zhending died in 441 BC, he was succeeded by his eldest son Ai, who was tragically killed and dethroned by his younger brother Si after 3 months. Giving Si a taste of his own medicine, the youngest brother Cao killed and dethroned him 5 months later. Cao would die in 426 BC and was followed by his son Wiley, who just before his death would finally recognize Han, Zhao, and Wei as equal vassal states in an attempt to secure peace for the capital by allying with its immediate neighbors against the rising threat of the Qin in the west. King Wili died in 402 BC and was followed by his son On. Around this time, Han, Zhao, and Wei were in a triple alliance due to their common Jin roots and contributed to a defense pact and common army, with the Wei assuming de facto power roles due to the strong leadership of the Marquis Wen of Wei. Marquis Wen would install Li Qiu as Wei's state hydraulic engineer, and later, after being impressed with his musings, his philosopher, culminating in him asking him to write the official book of the laws for the state of Wei. Wei's leadership would be tested when Wei led the united army across Zhao territory to attack and conquer the buffer state of Zhongshan between Zhao and Yan. Zhao did not appreciate this incursion, and in 383 BC, they withdrew from the alliance and moved their capital to the city of Handan, directly on the border with Wei. Zhao then began attacking the small buffer state of Wei, who was also provocatively located in a way that Zhao soldiers would have to come awfully close and at times intrude into Wei territory to reach their destination. We would appeal to Wei for military assistance, and Wei would launch a push into Zhao from the west. Zhao requested outside support from the Chu, who were always eager to expand north, and the war became an underhanded stalemate and ending where the Zhao had pushed back the Wei and now occupied a portion of their territory. Meanwhile, in Qi, the Duke of Qi from the ruling Jiang family died with no children, leaving the family with no heirs and causing power to be passed to the House of Tian. The new Duke aimed to regain all Qi territory ever lost and amassed a powerful army that was extremely lethal and effective in attacking neighboring states over these territorial disputes. King On died in 376 BC and was followed by his son Li, who died in 369 BC and was followed by his younger brother Xian. In 362 BC, the Wei exchanged territory with their Jin brethren Han and Zhao in an effort to mend relations in the face of increasing Qin threats from the west. This year, a Qin invasion of Wei would narrowly be held off after an intervention from Zhao forces on their behalf, although frequent Qin attacks would cause Wei to move its capital east to Kaifeng, far away from the threats of the Qin frontier. In 354 BC, the Wei mercilessly turned on the Zhao, who less than a decade before had saved them from the Qin, and then put their capital Handan under siege. The Qi, who was allies with Zhao under the military command of Sun Bin, who was Sun Tzu's great-great-great-grandson, and who also confusingly would later write a military strategy book called The Art of War, which would divide historians for hundreds of years on which century Sun Tzu lived in, with the argument coming to rest after evidence surfaced of the existence of Sun Bin and his own impressive military career. Sun Bin would swiftly lead Qi forces to attack the Wei capital since it was undefended as they besieged Handan. This would force Wei to withdraw its forces and end its goals for outward expansion, instead turning inwards, becoming a flourishing center for Chinese philosophy. During the chaos of the Warring States period, several of China's most prominent philosophers came about in their own era, known as the Hundred Schools of Thought. The most endearing aspect of the earlier Confucius's teachings and the hidden social harmony was the idea that control of government could be maintained by making sure the people of the kingdom were treated well and were content and therefore would not support any sort of rebellion. During this generation, Confucius's successor Mencius was invited to live in Wei as the official philosopher for the Duke of Wei. Mencius would expand the ideas of Confucianism by stating that people are inherently good, and thus the will of the people on average should be good, and therefore by being a king that appeases the people, you are not only looking out for your own regime, but you are also doing good by representing the will of the Chinese. The other hotbed for philosophy during the Hundred Schools of Thought was the state of Song, where Zhuangzi continued the popularity of Taoism by creating a humorous self-titled book, which uses parables to teach the reader that nothing really matters, and that human intervention is largely fruitless in the face of the mighty force of nature. Song also gave rise to Mozi during this period, who founded the belief of Mohism, which rejected the beliefs of Confucianism that power is won through divine intervention and social order is maintained through benevolent governance. And Taoism surrendered to the forces of human and geological nature to govern society, to instead preach that if you wanted to live in a utopian egalitarian society, then people must exercise their power and live out this dream of a society free of clans and hierarchy, where there's no hatred and no need for war. Regardless of what the philosophers were thinking in regard to human nature, by 344 BC, the Qi and Wei put aside their differences and recognized each other's growing powers, mutually declaring themselves kings of their own kingdoms, independent of the Zhou king. A prominent philosopher of Wei at this time was named Shang Yang, who was a follower of Li Kui's book of laws that governed his state, and he aimed to create a new school of thought known as legalism, which believed, excuse me, which believed laws like this were necessary to regulate human behavior since humans are inherently evil and will look to take advantage of one another whenever possible. The Duke of Qin liked Shang Yang's ideas and thought that his system of a strong centralized government could help Qin shake off the baggage of a feudal system that had been hanging on longer than in the rest of the states. Yang instituted a number of revolutionary ideas, including privatizing farmland, rewarding farmers who exceeded quotas, and jailing ones who failed to meet them, turning them into slaves to work on state projects. The Qin relied on slave labor due to their scarce population relative to the other states due to their mountainous terrain on the edge of the Chinese frontier. To boost the native population, Shang Yang signed a law requiring subjects to marry by a certain young age, and you could receive exemptions from tax payments the more children you had. He set up a system where those who were in prison can earn their freedom by working to drain swamps to create productive farmland, and created a double tax for households having more than one son in an effort to break up clans and create a society based on the nuclear family structure, which he preferred. These reforms allowed the Qin to consolidate their power, and they now aim to expand their influence. In 341 BC, Wei attacked Han, thinking they would be easy pickings, but the Qi came to the Han's rescue, badly beating Wei in a retreat, repeating the earlier events at Handan. All the previous Jin states, when pledged their loyalty to the king of Qi, including the king of Wei. Soon after taking advantage of Wei's weak state, Qin used its new might to invade Wei and conquer most of the territory, causing Qi and Qin to become the dominant states in China. In 334 BC, Chu's ally Yu was preparing to attack Qi in the north, but a diplomatic envoy from Qi sent to Yu instead proposed they create an alliance and attack Chu. Yu agreed, but this change in plans spelled disaster for Yu, who went from being vassal of Chu to being fully absorbed by them. Zhou King Xian attempted to exercise some power by appointing the Duke of Qin as hegemon, but in 325 BC, the Duke decided to declare himself king of the new independent kingdom of Qin. Xian died in 321 BC and was followed by his son Xinjing, who was followed by his son Nan in 315 BC. Nan was effectively a king in name only, having lost all of his powers. The independent Qin invaded Zhou and dismantled the power structure, causing the territory to fracture into the separate territories of Western Zhou, located around the city of Wangchang, and Eastern Zhou, around the city of Changzhou. King Nan was booted from Luoyang by the Qin and forced to travel around his former kingdom, begging the various clan leaders for support. At this time, the powers of the Qin were beginning to exceed the other kingdoms, and so many royal strategy meetings were held to debating alternative options and containing the Qin threat. On one hand was the vertical alliance option, where all the opposing kingdoms of the east would form an alliance against the Qin in the west, making a vertical line. The other option was the horizontal alliance, which was where a kingdom would make the decision to approach the Qin in a partnership against another kingdom in order to be spared having to face their army head on. A prominent diplomat in the Eastern Kingdoms named Su Qin attempted to unite them in a vertical alliance, but failed to convince the Qi, the most powerful of them. The Qi claimed the Qin were no longer a threat because they had gotten too big and were having internal divisions, and in 307 BC, it appeared that they were right, as the Qin had agreed to enter into a horizontal alliance with the Qi, with terms favorable to the Qi, making them briefly the most powerful kingdom. This alliance angered Zhao, who was in between the kingdoms, and in 299 BC, they finally declared their independence from Zhou and extended an alliance offer more favorable to the Qin to turn on the Qi, which they accepted. The remaining states formed a vertical alliance and defeated the Qin forces, driving them out of the territory they were occupying. In 299 BC, the historical account of the second half of the Zhou dynasty was published, known as the Bamboo Annals, although the text wouldn't be discovered until 281 AD, when it was exhumed from a noble's gravesite in Wei. Despite Qi's military success, the situation at home between the king and the nobles was causing friction, and the Lord Mengchang, who had led the Qi and their allies to many of their victories, was overthrown in a royalist coup from his military position and forced to flee away. Without his leadership, the vertical alliance fell apart, and the more dominant states of Qi and Qin decided to approach each other directly to discuss power sharing in 287 BC. Although diplomats backed the king of Qi down from making a formal alliance, Lord Mengchang planned his revenge on Qi from exile, raising an alliance of Qin, Zhao, Wei, and Yan to successfully invade and take Qi by surprise, destroying the kingdom and executing the king. The Chu, who had nominally decided with the Qi, were then attacked by the Qin, who had largely beaten them by 278 BC, leaving them to be the dominant power along now with Zhao in the north. Even though the two states had previously been allies, they now found themselves as rivals in a diametric power struggle. In 265 BC, the Qin made a move on the Zhao by moving into the buffer state of Han with the goal of marching on and seizing Wei as well. The Qin were unable to conquer all of Han, however, as local nobles had appealed to the Zhao, and intense fighting broke out. The head general of the Qin, Bai Qi, ordered the siege of the Zhao encampment at Changping, which lasted 46 days and led to their surrender, which was greeted with Bai Qi's order to execute all 400,000 Zhao prisoners of war. Although Zhao lived on as a kingdom, it was much weaker from this point on, allowing the kingdom of Qin to become the sole great power. In 256 BC, the Qin army marched into West Zhou, and captured, deposed, and executed King Nan, officially ending the Zhou dynasty and beginning the Qin dynasty, bringing an end to the Warring States period. The end of the period would be marked with the proliferation of a final wave of philosophers, most prominently Shunzi, who was Mencius's successor as the lead scholar of Confucianism. Shunzi disagreed with Mencius's view that people were generally good and instead believed people could be inherently evil, like in legalism, although he differed since he believed with proper cultivation by the state, people could become upstanding citizens. For legalism itself, the thinker Han Feizi continued the ideas of Shang Kang by writing a self-titled work, which stressed that laws could be more effective by alternating tactics between the stick and carrot, using punishments to dissuade bad behavior, and using rewards such as tax breaks for good behavior, with these ideas serving as one of the eventual inspirations for the progressive U.S. tax system.